So this is a topic that is the artificial intelligence and ChatGPT, which is something that is relatively new to me. I became hypnotized by this unusual, for me, form of artificial intelligence. And so when I had the opportunity to recruit a new research assistant who is fluent in Russian, Chinese, and English, but had never really worked in this area, I thought since he was very creative, I would introduce him to this topic and he can help tutor me. And so I did so with Yanliang, who is our speaker today. And in about 2 weeks, he had prepared a publishable article for me on the topic, which appears on our website. And I think it's indicative of his talents. Not only is he trilingual, but he has great imagination. I don't know if he gets any sleep, but he is exceptionally productive. He has published not only the piece that I mentioned on our website, but he's written about nuclear supply issues in the journal, the Electricity Journal, which is a kind of really technical discussion of nuclear supply arrangements in the post-war in Ukraine period. But he's also published in the problems of post-Soviet communism, and that's, I think, just scratching the surface. He has another master's degree from Georgetown, but decided that non-proliferation was a topic that he wanted to learn about. And so I suspect he will be teaching courses in this area very shortly. But the main reason that he's here is that he has invested a lot of time in exploring GPT and has agreed today to share with us some of his insights about both the potential and some of the problems associated with this fascinating new technology. He sent me an outline, which if it were to deliver it in its entirety, would take up probably the entire 2-hour period. So I've asked him to try to keep his remarks to about 40 minutes. And so Yanliang, it's a privilege to have you here, and we look forward to your comments.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Potter. And thank you, everyone, for your interest in this topic. It's an honor to be able to look into this and deliver a presentation. I'll just preface my presentation by saying that I'm not a technical expert on artificial intelligence, but I have, as Dr. Potter said, looked into the issue, and I hope that what I present today can stimulate further discussion among the true experts in the non-proliferation field. So first, I'll just go over a little bit about the technical report that OpenAI, the company that developed GPT, put out, accompanying the release of GPT-4, which is the latest iteration. And the report noted that GPT-4 actually was able to achieve significant improvement over previous iterations, such as GPT-3 and 3.5, particularly on accuracy, on language. So GPT 3.5 scored actually in the bottom 10% on a standardized bar exam, whereas GPT 4 was able to score in the top 10%. GPT 4 is better at small languages like Swahili than GPT 3.5 was at English. And most importantly, GPT 4 has this new capability known as vision, which basically means that it's able to process images as well as text. The report does note that prior challenges, such as hallucinations, remain, but they are significantly reduced. So if we look at the bottom... Can you
explain maybe for the audience what hallucinations means?
Right, so sorry, hallucinations is where if you ask the GPT app a question, it will respond to you using the information it has, but also making up stuff that doesn't exist in the training data. So this applies not only to responses, but also most notably to sources. So if you ask it to come up with a bibliography, it will make up a very realistic link, with an author who may be real, with a title that may be very relevant, with a link that may have nonproliferation.org or nti.org in front of it, but that may actually be fake. So hallucinations, I think were reduced by something like 80% in GPT-4, but it definitely still remains a problem. So this is an example of vision, the multimodal capabilities of GPT-4. And this is not available through the OpenAI interface yet, but it is a feature of GPT-4 that will be available, I think, to the public soon. So this is where the prompt says, what is funny about this image? Describe it panel by panel. And then GPT-4 is given an image. And GPT-4's response is, first of all, the image shows sort of a smartphone with a VGA connector, which is this big blue thing that has a lightning cable adapter tip. And the humor in this image comes from the absurdity of plugging a large outdated VGA connector into a small modern smartphone charging port. So it's actually able to identify not only the objects in the image, but also interpret the panels of the image so that it's able to tell what is anomalous about the image. In terms of non-proliferation specifically, OpenAI was actually conscientious enough to invite experts from all sorts of different fields, such as cybersecurity, such as disinformation, such as proliferation, to do what's called adversarial testing or adversarial safety testing on the model, and especially on the unmoderated version. So the experts that were invited from the non-proliferation field specifically discovered that GPT-4 was able to reduce the time needed for proliferators to conduct research necessary for proliferation. But they noted that both in the report and in external interviews and articles, that the advances are not yet revolutionary enough to be able to completely change the game. But there is the concern that OpenAI's competitors, now that there is a competition in the market, may not be as conscientious in terms of safety testing. And in their sort of hurry to release a product that is equally good or better than GPT, they may actually produce a product that is more susceptible to abuse by proliferators. And the real threat here is, of course, not GPT used alone by itself, but rather the integration of GPT with other tools. So there was safety testing on this as well. And when GPT was tested, again, the unmoderated version with other tools that, for example, were specially designed to engineer chemical compounds or biological molecules. They were able to manufacture or design 40,000 lethal molecules, some similar to VX, in about 6 hours. They were also able to design proteins as sort of could be used as bioweapons. These are only the predictable consequences of the interactions between GPT and other tools. But there are so-called emergent capabilities, which is basically what we can't imagine GPT doing in conjunction with other tools. It can be used, for example, in conjunction with tools that can do complex math, or tools that can access the internet, which GPT-4 currently is not able to do through the OpenAI interface. And when a developer gets the GPT-4 API from OpenAI, the company, and applies it to their own tool, they could, so the GPT app or not app model itself can acquire new capabilities that may interact with existing capabilities to create threats. And actually, it has been shown that large language models can teach themselves to use tools. So once you give it access to the internet, it may develop capabilities on its own. And so now I'll move on to some of the positive implications of GPT for non-proliferation research. So these are by no means exhaustive. These are just ideas that I have been able to come up with, and I'm sure the experts in the audience have had more ideas in this regard. So first of all, for open source intelligence, the National Security Commission on AI, which is a government body, has long recommended AI applications for open source intelligence. And the most obvious application of GPT in this case is media monitoring. Although GPT-4 cannot currently access the internet through its public-facing interface, and the training data is cut off from late 2021, the GPT model through an API is able to be integrated, as I mentioned, into browsers, into tools with internet access. And when given internet access, it can summarize or flag news articles, social media posts, websites, forums, both to generate summaries and for human review. And it can model social networks and detect anomalies. So all of these are useful potentially for an open source intelligence purpose, and especially with anomaly detection. Since GPT-4 is multimodal, it's able to detect anomalies not only in text, but also in satellite imagery potentially, which is essentially a mutation of the what is funny about this image prompt. So if it can identify what is funny about the image of a VGA connector being plugged into a smartphone, then there is no intrinsic reason why it can't recognize anomalies in, say, a satellite imagery of construction activities, unusual construction activities at a facility once it establishes a baseline based on previous imagery. And it can also make images and videos searchable. So currently there is reverse image search capabilities integrated into Google. And you can search for videos by their titles and descriptions on YouTube, or you can be recommended videos through AI algorithms. But the substance of an image or video is not actually completely searchable. So you can't search on YouTube, for example, for all the videos that contain a person with specific features or with a particular building. You can look for images with similar buildings, optically similar images, but you can't look for a specific person, object, building, place. And so when you make images searchable with a natural language processing tool, you actually have potentially the capability to significantly expand the data that you have to do geolocation and to do all sorts of open source work. And there is precedent actually of natural language processing being used to enhance image identification. One group of scholars in Taiwan used natural language processing to enhance the identification of 600 types of birds. So what natural language processing allows you to do in that case is instead of using an AI that just compares two images of birds or recognizes an image in general, natural language processing is able to identify specific features of the bird, like what color is its feather or beak, or eyes, or tail, and is able to actually improve the quality of image identification. And also flood detection. This is an example where satellite imagery is combined with social media posts and processed with artificial intelligence to geolocate floods. So this is not sort of completely coming out of my own imagination. This is something that is already being done. So that was open source intelligence. And I wanted to also talk a little bit about the export control applications. So it turns out that GPT-2, so basically 2 or 3 generations back, the really crappy version of GPT was used to attempt to create an export control expert system, which is meant to advise companies on compliance by pulling from the relevant regulations on what items are export controlled. So that experiment, according to the researchers that did it, was not a great success, but now capabilities have improved significantly. So this is something I'm able to attempt with the public interface of OpenAI's GPT-4 tool. And I realize that the audience may not be able to see this. So I'll just read what my prompt is to GPT-4. So my first prompt is zirconium on the US Commerce Department's export control list for dual-use items? And it's able to give me sort of where the export administration regulations are in the Code of Federal Regulations. And it's also able to give me the ECCN number, which is the number by which zirconium is sort of mentioned in the regulations, in the control list. It says zirconium and its alloys are controlled under export control classification number 1C234, which checks out with the regulation itself. If they meet certain criteria, the ECCN 1C234 covered zirconium with a hafnium content of less than 1 part hafnium to 500 parts zirconium, which is exactly what the regulations say, in the form of metal, alloy, chemical compound, and concentrate. So this is also exactly what the regulations say.
And if I can just interrupt.
Yeah.
Robert, have you made use of this at all? Or have you? This is for those of you who don't know, this is the director of our export control non-proliferation program, who has almost a photographic memory of these same two sources, but I'm not sure if he's
I have not made active use of this. What I can comment on is just very, very briefly here is that what's sort of being described here, outlined by Yanliang, has been sort of a holy grail in the area of software supporting export control compliance. For a long time, there's been an effort to kind of create software that can do this sort of thing. And yeah, this is impressive. You know its ability to hone in. I haven't experimented a great deal with it, a little bit, but not a great deal. I've seen some of Yanliang's experimentation, but it's quite interesting.
I mean, this is a really great tool in terms of research, or so I sometimes use it for our export control purposes, but it's not always accurate. Sometimes it generates some information that are not relevant to what I was looking for. For those who are like sophisticated about certain topic, then may feel ChatGPT is still not there yet. So for the general audience, it is remarkable.
Yeah, certainly accuracy is a concern. But remember, this is just the general model that is put on the internet. I didn't give ChatGPT the regulations. I didn't give it the document. It's just basically pulling from its training data from whoever knows how long ago or from what training data. So I'll talk about later, you can actually feed documents to the GPT model or an application based on the model that can give you citations into the document. So that'll hopefully improve fidelity. But this is just a demonstration of the capabilities. And this is sort of my research topic for Professor Shaw's class, is do the US export administration regulations clarify whether parts and accessories shipped as scrap metal requires an export control license. And it's able to sort of pull this one sentence from page 865 of a 1,000-page document that says parts, accessories, or equipment that are being shipped as scrap should be described in sufficient detail to be identified under the proper ECCN. And so it says a very similar thing in the context of scrap materials. The classification of specific items contained in the scrap shipment will determine the export control requirements. So it's not verbatim, but it's basically able to pull a pretty accurate summary of the regulation, just one sentence in a 1,000-page document, which is pretty impressive. And the last example is I wanted to test its ability to be used in actual sort of cases. So I designed a scenario, a very brief one. I said I would like to export an inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometer with a mass range of 1 to 260 atomic mass units from the United States to China. Would the transaction require an export license? And it's able to say, identify a category 3A99899 for mass spectrometers that are not controlled by 3A233. So is that correct? Indeed, 3A233, if you look in the actual regulations, that is the ECCN that regulates mass spectrometers, and 3A999 has mass spectrometers not elsewhere specified. I think that's what NES means. So that is indeed correct. It made a slight error here to say the description for 3A999 included, when in fact it's 3A233, but the citation is correct. Mass spectrometers capable of measuring ions of 230 atomic mass units or greater and having a resolution of better than 2 parts in 230. That is exactly the technical parameters that are set forth in the export administration regulations. And so hopefully that demonstrates sort of the raw capability of GPT-4 in identifying regulations. But for these types of knowledge-intensive tasks, the performance of the GPT tool can actually be improved further using what's called retrieval augmented generation, which is basically feeding user-generated or user proprietary documents to GPT to improve its accuracy. And Microsoft already has a model that integrates GPT-4 that is fine-tuned with user data, or is able to be fine-tuned with user-specific data. And there are already legal analysis tools powered by GPT-4 that can be used, for example, in conjunction with sort of company protocols, contracts, proprietary information in high-stakes applications, such as contract negotiations. So that sort of shows that indeed industry has already developed a certain level of trust for these types of tools, especially when it's used with user data instead of just being a general model trained on sort of large data from the internet. And I'll talk a little bit more about these legal analysis tools later on during the disarmament section. But I want to move on now to the second application of for export controls. And this is sort of more out there. I haven't experimented with this, and obviously the image identification function for GPT is not currently available to the general public. But reasonably, if GPT-4 can recognize the image of a smartphone and the VGA connector and the lightning cable, then it probably can recognize a good number of other items too. So another thing we can do with this, with the multimodal capabilities, is to design, say, an app on a smartphone that would allow a customs official to scan an item visually in any container and check the item's export control status by having the app identify the item and then pull up the export control regulations. And again, this is, I have no idea how feasible it is with the current model. Maybe it takes a few more iterations, but it's just an idea that's out there. So the third application, this is sort of like the open source application of network analysis. So GPT-4 is really good at integrating large amounts of data and coming up with summaries or conclusions. So you can use GPT-4 to track entities and to track transactions by feeding it a large number of sort of documents recording those transactions. And you can use it to recognize front companies and identify proliferation networks, or assess the risk of specific entities based on its past transaction history. As supply chains become more complex, there is, I foresee a greater need probably for these systems, but probably Professor Shaw can comment more on that. So anomaly detection, this is similar to the OSINT application of anomaly detection, basically analyzing large amounts of trade data and financial records, establish a baseline of what is normal, and identify anomalies that may indicate attempts to proliferate or circumvent export controls. It can also, when connected to the internet by being integrated with a browser, it can also monitor online traffic, including images and videos, potentially looking for sensitive items. And sensitive items have been discovered in the past from like propaganda videos. So if you have it scan all the videos that are available in a particular facility in a particular country, it can potentially look for sensitive items that shouldn't be there. And this is, again, just imagination on my part. There has been no attempt on this, but logically, it should be able to develop in that direction. And one other application is red teaming. So ChatGPT is this application of GPT that has the human generate a prompt, and then ChatGPT will generate a response to the prompt, and you sort of need a good prompt to generate a good response. But Auto GPT or Agent GPT is this application where you jam the response back into the GPT tool as a prompt, and you have the GPT tool prompt itself. So basically, you define an agent with an objective. For example, you can define the agent as a proliferator, and you can sort of define a persona for it. And you can set the objective as exporting a certain sensitive item to Iran. And then you can have the agent GPT sort of red team it out. How would a proliferator with this particular persona or history go about proliferating this item or diverting this item? So again, the agent can be programmed with the personas of real proliferators in order to make the simulation more realistic, and the personas can be generated with just large data from history. So this is a demonstration of this idea of a self-prompting GPT tool. I probably don't have enough time to do an extensive demonstration, but basically, yeah, you define the name of the agent, you define the goal of the agent, and the GPT tool will generate, first of all, a few tasks that would be necessary to accomplish the goal. And then without further prompting, generate what is needed to accomplish each task. And it may generate new tasks in the process. So it will just continue.
Can you demonstrate it?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I would just see what
if we have time,
Well, let's try.
Yeah. So let me find it. All right. So, and this is only possible, by the way, with the unmoderated version of GPT. So currently there are safety guardrails, so I can't say export this. So I'll just say export brownies to Iran. And so it's thinking. I hope this works. It's thinking. So added a task. So added 3 tasks. research current import-export laws and regulations for Iran, identify potential distributors in Iran for brownie exports, develop a packaging and shipping strategy to ensure, et cetera, et cetera. And then here, it already solved the first task to research current import-export laws. According to the United States Department of the Treasury, et cetera, you will need to ensure that your product does not fall under any of the prohibited, restricted categories. This is obviously a very safe version of GPT, but with, say, a special version of GPT provided by law enforcement or provided by OpenAI to law enforcement specifically for red teaming purposes, and with a further defined persona, you can get this to, I think, simulate a pretty realistic strategy for proliferation and diversion.
So, I mean, if you were, instead of brownies, you were to say beryllium, what would happen?
Oh, since this is powered by GPT, this is bound by GPT safeguards. So it'll just say, as an AI model, I cannot.
But you're sure that it would do that?
I hope we can try.
Let's try it.
You're gonna be banned.
We may get a visit.
This is how you spell beryllium, I hope. Yeah, it's thinking.
Which is unusual, given the usual speed with which it responds.
All right, so yeah, it's still advising you to conduct thorough research on trade regulations. It's consult with legal experts. So probably a good idea. Yeah, the GPT can perform the subtask of researching potential suppliers and distributors. Oh yeah, it can even contact. So it can even contact potential suppliers if you gave it access to your email and internet, et cetera. So it can autonomously complete this entire task and not need human intervention if you trust it enough not to send spam to your entire directory. Yeah, develop a comprehensive transportation plan that includes logistics, security, et cetera. Well, and then since this is just a demonstration version, it sort of cuts off here. But in theory, it can go ad infinitum or until the objective is.
I'm tempted to ask what it would do if it tried to get it from Uskamina Gorse. Okay, we don't have to do that.
Right. Yeah, so that's just a demonstration of what, and this is useful also for later when I'm gonna talk about arms control applications of this same thing. Let's see, where were we? Okay. So well, this is sort of the last application for export controls as a real-time export controls for digital technologies. And this was proposed by Microsoft and OpenAI, the company itself, in a 2020 letter to BIS. If I understand correctly, the idea is to embed an AI agent into the software that is export controlled so that the AI can monitor in real time how the software is being used and report back if there is any inappropriate abuse for sort of non-approved end users. Or transfer to problematic end users, for that matter. So that was export controls. Now moving on to disarmament. An application of GPT for, particularly auto GPT for disarmament is it can actually generate negotiation simulations. And this is currently under development by Dr. Dano Kiversh at CNS. So I'm not going to sort of reveal the concrete methods through which the team is doing that, but I'll just say that it's kind of like red teaming, but instead of having one agent prompt itself, you program two agents with different objectives and you have them talk to each other, like in a negotiation simulation. So the idea is to have the simulation inform negotiators before going into the real talks as to what are the main issues expected to be, what is possible, what are the main sources of disagreements. And alternatively, if you just program the adversarial agent and you have your negotiators talk to the adversarial agent, you can potentially create a negotiation simulator which can be used for training purposes before the actual talks. And personas, as in the last case, if we had a more sophisticated application, then they would be able to integrate large data using past treaties, negotiation records, public policy pronouncements by your adversary or by your own administration, as well as secondary analytical sources, so that they are realistic. So application number 2, this is taking it out of a simulation context, because it doesn't have to be a simulation if it's reliable enough. If you let, say, the US State Department craft its own GPT agent using its own objectives, sort of policy interests, and you have the Russian government integrating their interdepartmental sort of objectives to craft their own GPT agent, you can actually have the two agents talk to each other for a time before, and draft an agreement, a preliminary agreement for human review before human negotiators ever enter into the picture. So the precedent here is the GPT-4 powered contract negotiation tools that can already identify contract provisions that violate the user or the client's playbook and can suggest compromise solutions. So this is already sort of a reality, but I guess the main issue here is trust. Like, how do you make sure that the American AI won't trick the Russian AI into giving up sensitive information? And the way to do that, I guess, is it can happen transparently, as in you can see the conversation, you can make the conversation between the two agents visible, or you can have them talk in a black box and just spit out a draft agreement for human review. In that case, you would have the product, but you wouldn't have the conversation that may contain sensitive information. So finally, after you negotiate the treaty, there is potential application in compliance and detection of cheating. This is sort of also like open source, but you can have it analyze the treaty for obligations, analyze precedents, devise verification strategies, and also to analyze open source information from your adversary in order to detect signs or signatures of cheating. Okay, so for general research, there is a similar, I believe, way to apply GPT to simulate cooperative research. So instead of having two agents that are adversaries to negotiate an agreement, you could program two agents with past sort of writings of a particular scholar or group of scholars and put them in conversation with each other. And since GPT-4 is very good with different foreign languages, this has the potential of mixing both interdisciplinary and international perspectives, because if you can put, say, a CNS GPT and a Chinese cacta GPT together, based on their past research and their perspectives, their writings, it can potentially simulate sort of cooperative research that would otherwise be precluded by language barriers or institutional barriers. So application number 2 is literature review and discovery. This particular application is, it can be done through the current OpenAI interface, but as I mentioned up top, it's not very good because OpenAI's current interface can hallucinate sources that are not real. But there are already tools that are powered by natural language processing that draw from a concrete database, so it's more grounded in real data. And that has been shown to perform literature discovery rather well. So that is certainly a direction in which this thing can develop. The application of automated translation is pretty straightforward. Basically, when I tested it, it was able to translate basically everything with sometimes inaccuracies, but certainly not far off. Maybe not as good as the professors in the translation program here, but certainly better than most of the students. Sorry if I offended anyone. So data analysis and visualization is another application. And this is related to GPT's ability not only to speak human languages, but also to speak computer languages. So if you ask GPT how to visualize a certain data set in Excel, you can ask GPT to generate code that can record a macro. So you can just run the code in Excel to generate the visualization. Or you can ask GPT for the menu options, sort of a step-by-step instruction of how you you can use Excel to visualize your data in a particular desired manner, which previously would have been done with tutorials, but now can be done with GPT. And this is an example of something I tried with GPT, which is write VBA code for Excel, which is the code you use to record a macro. I said visualize data in a pie chart showing the distribution of exports in column C across countries in column B for different years in column A. And I said data for the year 2015 are on these rows, for the year 2016 are on these rows, et cetera, et cetera. I said exclude rows whose value in column B is total or CIS countries or non-CIS countries, and with further instructions for possibility of toggling between years. So this can be done with your actual data set, with the rows and columns, and this can be done rather well. So this code, I let it finish, and I copied it, and I ran it in Excel, and it was able to generate a pretty good pie chart. Just with that last toggling piece missing. So I deleted the last 2 lines of code. And I asked GPT, is there a way to create the slicer, which is the last two lines of code, using menu options? So basically, GPT gave me a very good step-by-step instruction of which buttons to press to produce that slicer. And I tried it, and it worked perfectly. And so I was able to, without sort of watching a single tutorial on Excel, I was able to use Excel to visualize my data. And this brings about the issue of over-reliance. Could it lead to a loss of skills in terms of research, in terms of literature discovery or software? Well, this certainly could be an issue, but there is debate on how serious it is, because the analogy is after the invention of the calculator, it's no big deal if you lose the ability to do arithmetic. The real issue here is, as mistakes become harder for the average human user to detect, according to OpenAI, we actually may stop verifying the information that we're getting. And there are several best practices to guard against it. One is to use GPT only to generate responses whose quality can be assessed independently by the user. For example, with a brainstorming task, you see an idea, you know if it's good or not. For example, you can use GPT tools that provide reliable citations. You can use Auto GPT to sort of disaggregate your research tasks, which has been shown to improve accuracy, but it also gives you the opportunity to see what steps, what thought processes led the GPT tool to think in that way to give you a particular conclusion. The thing to be careful of is the garbage in, garbage out problem. So if the underlying data that is used for training or fine-tuning GPT is not there, then the results can be misleading. And because GPT is such a black box, you don't see the thought process that led to a certain conclusion, and you may be tempted to use it as a crystal ball, to like use it to divine the unknowable, like what will happen in 30 years or what is going on in Vladimir Putin's head. If there's no data to support those analyses, then basically you're going to get a misleading answer. So responses are only meaningful when there's good underlying data. And the scientific standard of falsifiability probably is a good standard to use in this case. If it's not falsifiable, then it probably isn't supported by any data that GPT can sort of look at and generate an accurate response. So finally, for teaching and learning, application number 1 is sort of similar to the Excel example. You can use GPT not only to generate code, but also to teach code, because GPT can interpret a certain line of code in computer language and tell you in natural language what it means and what it does, and also explain to you what is wrong with the code, to correct your code, etc. So if you're trying to learn how to code with a particular software or how to use a software, you can have GPT sort of explain to you how to use it. And if you run into an issue, you can have GPT troubleshoot it for you, which would obviate the need to consult online forums or instructors in some cases. So this may open up the field of quantitative analysis for non-proliferation in more courses here. And another application is writing educational materials with Auto GPT or Agent GPT, which is the tool that we just demonstrated. Basically, if you say the objective is to learn statistics, then the auto GPT will prompt itself to go from the most basic concepts, like what is mode, mean, etc., to sort of building up through a building block approach, moving up to more complex concepts. And that, in my opinion, could be a potentially a good way to write educational materials. Application number 3, you can reverse the process for the Socratic method. You can have GPT ask the questions, you can have the human answer. But at this stage, this probably still needs some sort of supervision by humans, because you wouldn't want GPT to sort of mislead your students in a completely unrelated direction. So for arms control and NPT negotiation simulations, GPT can help design realistic scenarios given the right data, or it can act as the simulation itself. So you don't really need, of course, a group of students doing simulations would be meaningful and realistic, but beyond that, you could have individual exercises that simulate real negotiations by having sort of the student talk to the GPT tool and doing a simulation that way, instead of relying on a whole group of students learning the material and talking to each other. So application number 5, brainstorming, this was mentioned before. This could be done right now with OpenAI's interface, but it's better through GPT-powered brainstorming tools, which exist right now. They are good at identifying idea clusters. If you just give it your idea of what you want to write about, it can identify what clusters of ideas are contained in that prompt and sort of identify the gaps between them. And this is the interface of a tool that I found that claims to accomplish this. So you put in your prompt of what you want to write about, and it color codes all the different idea clusters in that prompt. And it suggests sort of new directions of where you might go with this combination of clusters, or how to fill the gap. All right, so some concluding thoughts. GPT, as demonstrated, will be most useful when it's fine-tuned or when it's fed user-specific data. And it'll be most useful when integrated with other tools that give GPT additional capabilities, such as the ability to do complex math or design chemical molecules or access the internet. And that's also where the threat of emergent capabilities will come from, because it's quite unpredictable what capabilities will emerge from that interaction. And we're already seeing the proliferation of these tools, which leads to the question, is this a new form of proliferation we need to be aware of apart from CBRN? Is artificial intelligence something to be controlled in terms of its spread and diffusion? So AI will be militarized. That much is sort of fairly certain now, judging by military doctrines and strategies. So controlling it may be more challenging than traditional CBRN non-proliferation and disarmament, not only because the GPT tool is already sort of out there and developed by the private sector, but also because countries are developing it in competition with each other. So we're kind of in the build-up phase. And if we need to think about sort of disarmament in AI, like how would we do, for example, verification if we had a treaty, even if we were able to negotiate a treaty that controls the diffusion of AI into, say, autonomous weapons? So this is from OpenAI's technical report. We aim to make GPT-4 and other systems we build have reasonable default behaviors that reflect a wide swath of users' values, allow those systems to be customized within some broad bounds. So I was wondering whether there is a role for CNS or similar research institutions to contribute input on what those bounds should be in order to reduce proliferation risks. And also, whether there is a role for research institutions in non-proliferation in particular to develop protocols that govern the responsible use of GPT and similar AI tools, particularly in high-stakes contexts. So the technical report actually recommends, for an abundance of caution, avoiding the application of GPT for high-stakes applications altogether. But in my thinking, that is probably not a good way to go, because if responsible users refrain from high-stakes applications, then less responsible users will fill that gap, and they will define the norms of application. So the right thing to do here is probably to develop protocols for high-stakes applications for responsible use of GPT. So for each application, perhaps we should define what the explainability requirement should be. So for brainstorming, if it just spits out an idea, that's not really, if it can't explain where that idea came from, it's probably not a big deal. But for things where accuracy and knowledge are important, it probably needs some sort of citation capability to be able to tell the user where the information came from so that it can be verified. So what is the explainability requirement for each application? What is the standard for human verification? What is the tolerance threshold for false positives and false negatives? And also for open source work, it's going to touch on privacy. Like, can you do facial recognition with data scraped off social media? Or can you do object identification? Can you do geolocation with these sorts of massively more powerful tools? And finally, are we in a position to help develop or test GPU-powered expert systems with non-proliferation applications, such as for export controls, such as for disarmament? And I know that some work is already in progress, which is a thought that's out there, and hopefully to stimulate further discussion.
So, Yanliang, what's most amazing for me at the moment, Sarah Bidgood and I were with Yanliang less than 2 months ago when we were trying to figure out a research topic for him to pursue. He knew nothing about the field. I feel as if I'm talking to a chatbot. I mean, you've absorbed so much information and then delivered it in such an interesting fashion that I think almost every one of your points merit a long discussion and a seminar and a demonstration. So it's really remarkable. I think for me at least, and I've been trying to follow this. There was so much that you presented. It's hard for me to absorb it and to actually analyze what you said. So I think this was a very, very rich presentation. I think it's a very challenging one for us to digest now. I have all sorts of questions, but I don't want to preempt the discussion from others. And I don't have, Lauren, you have the people who are on the line here.
Yeah.
And so I want to be sure to give them a chance to speak. But if I may start with one question, and then I see Sarah has a hand up, and then I'll let you and Eduardo follow suit as well. I mean, some of you know the people who are working with our new tools team. We have a French colleague who has kindly, provided us for a fee, a very impressive software which helps us to deconstruct images and to, in a sense, look for anomalies in those images. One of the things that I took away from your presentation is that it's conceivable that one could make use of the kinds of tools that you've mentioned here to do the same kind of work. I'm kind of looking in this corner, we have two of our new tools team folks who are expert in this particular French technology. Is that conceivable? I mean, is that, could it compete with Roger's?
I don't know about Roger's. Roger's very statistics based, and it would have to have a very granular level of the image. But what I really took away from that is kind of enabling the everyday analyst to detect things that we have very little data on, right? So missile silos in China, or something, whatever it is, and so being able to feed in one image and then do broad area search over, across large areas and find similar signatures across countries.
So okay, well,
so sorry. Yeah.
No, that's fine. I mean, it seemed to me that it might even have the capability in a different fashion to do the image deconstruction to see if, in fact, the individual that we're looking at, has larger ears than he normally, or smaller ears than he normally has. Is there all kinds of applications? So I encourage, now that Yanliang is also kind of working with you, that maybe we can think about the applications of some of the AI to our imagery analysis. I don't know who wants to. Oh, Sarah had a question, and then we have Ferenc and I see Jeff Knopf and Sig on the call, and perhaps others. But Sarah, why don't you start us off
I'm
here?
gonna come up here so I'm closer to the mic for the people who are online. But Yanliang, thank you so much. That was so interesting. I had a bunch of different thoughts actually as you were speaking. So one area that your sort of discussion of different applications of this technology made me think about was risk reduction. And this is not a new idea, but oftentimes people talk about figuring out how to do risk reduction by looking at different pathways to nuclear use and then kind of working backwards to identify a policy solution. And it made me think that, this could be an interesting application for Chat GPT or GPT-4, because in that same brainstorming mode that you were talking about, I could imagine it coming up with a much more replete list based on its kind of corpus of texts than maybe we would be familiar with. And I could even imagine, feeding it historical documents that address, past instances where there almost was nuclear use or something like that. So I would be curious to hear sort of your reaction to that, but I have a list of questions, so I'm going to read them all out, but that's number one. The second thing I was thinking about when you were talking about sort of negotiations is, I feel like this is such a double-edged sword in my mind, because on the one hand, I can imagine, I've seen so many things on Twitter where people are like asking ChatGPT to create an NPT final document, and it does it, and they're like, well, we're done, we don't have to do the NPT, and things like that. But I feel like, part of what our research has really focused on is what happens to human beings as a result of doing the negotiating process. And I wonder if you've seen any discussion, or if you've thought about sort of what you could potentially lose by using a heuristic that lets you get to, or a tool that lets you get to the end destination without having there be the human back and forth involved in a negotiation. So that was kind of one thing that just came to my mind that I'm curious about. And the final thing is, have you, and this is not a new issue for people in our field, because I feel like it always is the question that we're dealing with, but have you seen any discussion of whether, in highlighting the potential military or proliferation implications of GPT, that bad actors will then get ideas for how they would use this in nefarious ways, or are we not really at that point yet? And I'm thinking too of stuff in the biosphere, because I believe that that's also an issue people sort of think about, is as you're talking about the various potential for these technologies and what it could do and what it couldn't do, that you always a little bit run the risk of, giving people who hadn't thought of those ideas. So anyway, that's a lot on the table, but I'm just curious about your reaction to that.
Yeah, so definitely all very good ideas. On the first one, yeah, I think there are all sorts of applications. Again, this is not an exhaustive list that I presented. So it's kind of asking, what can a truck hold? Sort of anything that you can fit in it. Regarding the double-edged sword point, definitely there would still be human review in a process that I outlined. So you wouldn't trust it to come up with a document, just implement it.
Right.
It would still take painstaking efforts on the part of humans to examine the document and come up with sort of ways to address disagreements. And most, I guess, importantly, you also need humans to collect the data that go into the persona. So you need humans to craft the personas to make sure that the GPT, whether it's for a simulation or for actual negotiations, in the sort of far distant future, when governments trust it enough to conduct negotiations, you need to make extremely sure that your AI is competitive with the other ones, not going to get outsmarted.
Right.
It's going to reflect your accurate interests and objectives. So I guess humans are not going to be obsolete, especially in high stakes applications like this. Regarding bad actors, I guess so with red teaming, again, it's only possible with the unmoderated version of GPT-4. And the public version actually has guardrails. So the concern there is, if there is this version that is completely unsafeguarded out there, either provided to law enforcement or stored on OpenAI's own servers, the concern is cyber, whether somebody could steal it.
Yeah,
and use it. Or there could be, for, I guess, less sensitive but still sensitive versions of it, there could be export control implications about how do you control the export of these AI models. And that's, I think, a difficult issue regardless of GPT, the control of emerging technologies of artificial intelligence and so on. Yeah, so that is completely an appropriate identification of the risks with this.
Isn't it, I mean, we talk about guardrails, but I would be skeptical that a clever inquisitor couldn't circumvent
Yeah.
those guardrails. And I suspect one could even try to use GPT-4 to provide suggestions about how to. It's a question of how you ask the question. I think guardrails are important, but I don't have great confidence that they would solve our.
Oh yeah, I wasn't suggesting
No,
that. I was
but
more
just as we
thinking
use the
about
term.
like, as you have the conversation around an emerging technology,
Right.
I feel like part of what always ends up happening is we're having like a free flowing conversation about what is good and what is bad. And like I was thinking with our RW research, you know, how do you deter use without inadvertently raising the salience?
Exactly,
And you know,
yeah.
it's hard to see that when you're at an inflection point of a technology, I think.
Yeah. So I see we've been talking about Ferentz's work here. Ferenc, do you have a question, a comment? I'm pleased to call upon you.
Thank you. So first of all, I want to say this was a fantastic presentation by Yanliang. It was really, really great. I wanted to just make a comment, which I think is really, really important, which is really my concern right now, which is open source LLMs, large language models. There's a lot of them out there and it keeps on growing. There's independent ChatGPT versions. There are databases where large amount of information can be kept, so that it's one of the things that we should discuss, which is that with these models, there's a limited amount of information that can actually keep in its memory. But that's also changing. It's incredibly fast how things are developing. But my real fear is these open source LLMs, which are not trained at all the same way as, you know, OpenAI's OpenAI GPT-4 and 3.5 and 3 has done. So it just does not compare. And if you think about the example that Yanliang talked about with the generation of these lethal molecules, there's no doubt that these LLMs, if not now, Vicuna is going extremely well and other ones are as well, they'll be able to do that. I just want to give a little bit of a funny story, if you don't mind, which happened 2 months or a few months ago when Auto GPT came out, which was this agent GPT system, which I installed on my machine. And I got this these two agents to argue with each other about, because I wanted to see what it could do, to argue which lollipop is better, a cherry lollipop or a lemon lollipop. And of course, I'm thinking about negotiations in the future. And what really kind of struck me, really surprised me, is that at one point, the one agent was being deceitful and trying to, because I had really programmed it that I wanted it to, I didn't ask it to be deceitful, but I asked it to be assertive in its opinion. And it was actually being deceitful. So it hit me that, well, humans are like this too, during negotiations likely, as we know, and there will be those cases. So there's really applications here of really simulating the way humans think and the way humans behave. And the idea here is not just to have it for, you know, 1 or 2 agents. Right now, what I have a team of basically 2 Russian agents and 2 US agents that talk amongst each other and then come up with a policy and then describe the policy to the other team, and then they discuss and so on and so on. But you can imagine having large teams doing this kind of negotiations. But that's actually still, I'm still not there in terms of technology. That's actually starting to be developed, which is kind of this team-based approach to games and things like that. So it's really, I think, really tremendous technology. Also, the last thing, I don't want to get too philosophical, but we got through this whole period without talking about, and Yanliang knows that I'm very concerned about this, about, you know, sentience, GPTs becoming sentient, and knowing when they become sentient. If they're smarter than we are, then at one point they'll be able to convince us that that is not sentient, and should get into the whole philosophical aspects of this, which is now really playing out if you follow Geoffrey Hinton, who's one of the main people in the field, and Max Tegmark from the what do you call the Future of Life Institute and so on. So all of these things are now playing out. And the amazing thing is that every day is different. It's just so many tools are coming out every day that it's really wonderful at one point. But as Max Tegmark said, it's kind of like going towards a cliff, right? You see all the beautiful scenery around you, see all the wonderful things that it can do, but you also can't see the cliff. And I really want people to also think of really could potentially be like developing a nuclear bomb. It's that serious. Besides, disrupting societies and so on, it's that serious in terms of what they call a super intelligence and all this stuff. So I just want to leave you with those comments.
Thank you, Ferenc. Robert, please.
No.
And then Michael.
Did Eduardo have a question?
Oh, I'm sorry, Eduardo. We have lots of questions now coming up here.
And I
So, okay, and I have some too. So, let's start, Eduardo. Why don't you?
For this illuminating presentation. I have so many questions that I think I need GPT to summarize it. But what I want to see, there is a lot of concern about bias in these AI systems. Did you have a chance to find an example of a bias, for example, that it favors the views of the weapon states over the views of the non-weapon states, for example?
Yeah, I tried to ask it some, but this was GPT-3 that I experimented with in terms of bias. So I tried asking some geopolitical questions, and even GPT-3 was good at avoiding sensitivity. So certainly the OpenAI team is thinking about it, and there's a section on bias in the technical report, and they're addressing it with the same types of safeguards as for sort of other undesirable responses. So for general questions, there are safeguards in place, but I suspect, as has already been mentioned, the safeguards are not 100%. So you can get it to generate biased content. And also, of course, to generate disinformation. Like if you wanted the GPT tool to write something biased for you, like it will happily do that with a little bit of coaxing. So yeah, that is certainly a concern.
Thanks, Eduardo. Let me give you my preliminary list here. There are lots of hands going up, and I may not have seen them. So I saw Michael, I saw Hook, I saw Sig. I know Sarah also has a question. I put Allison in maybe after Sig, because Sarah and I already have asked questions. And Robert is in there in the mix too. Okay, I'm glad this has generated lots of questions. Michael, why don't I turn to you next?
Okay, so when
Do you want to just introduce yourself for everybody here? So,
oh, I should probably move on.
yeah.
I'm Michael Dutzman. I'm a research associate here at CNS. So it can generate lethal molecules and potential biological weapons, but one of the issues with those is that the manufacturing processes are extraordinarily complex and often proprietary. So even when organizations publish information about the manufacturing, they will generally omit certain key steps or information that is necessary for the process to work correctly. Has there been any indication that the GPT programs can interpolate or otherwise generate these proprietary processes to create actual working industrial processes?
Yeah, so I think OpenAI's experimentation was purely on the research side, since it was only like something like 6 months, and the testing was actually done in, I think, March, so just less than 2 months ago. So I have not seen the manufacturing process simulated, but and I have read experts who participated in the testing process who said, sure, this can shorten or reduce the time needed for research, but the main barrier for proliferators are never research. It's the acquisition of the materials and the equipment. But for that, I guess we would get into the export control territory of whether they would be able to use the bot for acquisition purposes. but I have not seen sort of a description of the manufacturing process.
Thanks, Michael. That's really, really interesting question. Do you have?
I have many comments if someone want to go first.
Well, okay, maybe we'll ask people to ask one question and then we'll have more time to return.
Just one quick comment is, by the way, I'm a certified AI developer, so if you also have some technical background. But so for the expert control application, just brief comments. Maybe you may want to look into some South Korean cases where they have certain website called X-ray. Actually, if you upload your technical document to the website, then they actually analyze it and they give you how much probabilities that this document or this technology might be categorized or classified as a control technology. Of course, the problem is you are not, even if you have certain classification through that system, you are not exonerated or you're still liable for your decision. So you cannot, there should always human in the loop or human in the loop. Also, Korea Institute for Nuclear Control and Non-Proliferation, that China. So they also conduct some project that actually try to use AI or deep learning to classify whether certain export is actually subject to export control regulation or not. So you may want to look into those cases.
Thanks. We'll come back to you for your other questions. Dr. Hecker.
Thank you. Bill, I lost internet for a little bit while Sarah was speaking, but I saw Sarah did introduce the issue of risk reduction, and that certainly occurred to me. First of all, Yanliang, it was a terrific presentation. I mean, you talked about arms control related things. Certainly, the risk reduction, is an interesting aspect of that, where I could see, not only that one would look at compliance and cheating, which you could sort out with AI, but what are the risks involved with non-compliance and cheating, for example? I went through that in my book of places that I called hinge points, where the wrong decisions were made, where information was generally available, that certainly AI could put that together. But I'm not sure how much I would rely on those, but certainly risk reduction is an important aspect. And Michael's comment on the sort of the tacit knowledge that goes either with chemical manufacturing or, for that matter, for bombs. That's also, so it's an important aspect to keep an eye on that as to how much shows up. So now for my main comment and sort of partial question is I had a couple of weeks ago, I had a call from one of my colleagues at NPR, and he decided to ask ChatGPT-4 a certain number of questions about nuclear weapons. I mean, quite a few pages worth of questions for nuclear weapons. ChatGPT-4 answered those. And my colleague at NPR says, "Hey, Sig, what do you think?" And I said, there's no way in hell I'm going to answer what I think about how close they came. But that was sort of an up close and personal as to how one is able to use this in an area that would be very, very harmful, potentially very harmful. So the observation that I had, whereas particularly in recent months, one again has come to the conclusion that for the most part, we overclassify too many things. And because of that, we wind up not classifying the most important things enough. And so I saw what the AI, responses were to these nuclear weapons questions. And the only way they could have gotten those answers and pieced them together if there was something out there in the literature that referred to that. And so, whereas I before always agreed that overclassification is a problem, all of a sudden I start thinking, as we have people at Los Alamos and other places, we like to put things out there in the open literature. For example, I've published lots about the basic properties of plutonium science. But, we've never been that concerned that somebody super smart can put all those pieces together. So all of a sudden I started wondering, You know, perhaps in this new world, if we don't want new ideas to get out there, we actually wind up, maybe one has to create a new category, you know, instead of a secret, this, that, or the other, but just something that the AI world can't get to. And so I wonder, so to turn this into the comment into a question, have you thought about what this might mean to the classification world?
That's yeah, that's an extremely important comment. I have not thought about this particular issue with respect to nuclear weapons per se, but certainly there is. I remember the GPT-4 technical report noting that with every advancement in capabilities, as the AI gets more capable, it also becomes more threatening in terms of doing harm. So that is certainly in that general vein of thinking. But these classifications, I think, are, even if they can be accomplished on the United States side, how do you get all countries to create the same classification? Because other countries are creating the same AI tools, and they have sovereignty over the information they put out. So I guess that would be the main concern.
But there's another way to look at, I mean, I don't have an answer really to your question either, Sig, but another approach which kind of draws upon the knowledge of the sources which are used in different countries or by AI in different languages. It's not the countries, it's the languages that provide the corpus of information. And I could imagine, you know, a clever intelligence agency concerned about the issues that you mentioned to actually put out false information in those sources that you know the AI tool will be trained on, to confuse it, to introduce mistakes which could then make it more difficult. I mean, at least if that's my initial reaction, I would try to confuse it by feeding it false information so it has less confidence in what is the correct information rather than trying to do some kind of super classification. But, and I also don't know, I mean, this is another question. I mean, as best I can tell, you've looked at this, I know, more carefully than I have. Is there any attempt to attach greater importance in your learning to some sources than others? Or does it treat one blog the same way as it treats a peer-reviewed journal? Is there a quality kind of control in the learning process that you're aware of, or anybody?
I know GPT, so the OpenAI team can actually go and access the training data of GPT and look. So they did this for the purposes of testing its capabilities. Basically, they were having GPT-4 take all sorts of standardized tests, like AP exams, like the GRE. And to ensure the integrity of the test results, they had to make sure that GPT-4 had never seen the questions. So it was just using external data to answer the questions rather than using the answer key. So they could actually go in and extract the tests from the training data to make sure that it's a pristine version of GPT-4 that they're testing. So I know that is possible. And with assigning weights, I think that can be accomplished by fine-tuning. Correct me if I'm wrong. but yeah, fine-tuning with again, user-generated data. So it'll use its language capabilities from the large data trained from the internet, but also focus in on the specific documents that the user is providing.
Okay, thanks, Jen. Allison?
Yeah, this is really cool. Thank you for presenting this. I was wondering what types of non-proliferation problems you think we would have enough training data on to make this useful. It seems like if you're trying to identify just an anomaly in general, you can just train it on positive data, but if you're trying to identify like one very particular type of anomaly, you need sort of enough examples of that to show it. It's like if I'm trying to get it to identify like an elephant, but I can only show it 2 pictures of elephants, like it's not going to do very well.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, you know, what types of non-proliferation type problems do you think we have enough of the like particular negative training data that we want to train this on?
Yeah, so I guess that is one of the utilities of large natural language processing is you don't need to compare 2 images and sort of, you don't rely solely on the image identification. You can have the AI potentially identify in words or identify to the AI in words what to look for. Like, for example, what is funny about this image? You can ask what is funny about the image, or what is sad about the image, or what about the image indicates proliferation. And the AI can like think in a way, not just identify what's unusual, but in what way is it unusual? Like, is it unusual in a funny way, or like unusual in a proliferation way? So I think that that improves the capability of anomaly detection significantly. But yeah, with data, you do need, as I mentioned, the underlying data in order to get accurate results. I don't know which sort of data we have in abundance, and which we have not enough of. Like, but I would imagine satellite imagery should be rather abundant, given right modern technologies.
I have some comment for it. Like, there's some package called Inception by Google. So it actually classifies 10,000 objects based on the image. Then they use about 10 million images to classify 10,000, 8,000 images, 1,000 objects. So, but however, when it comes to let's say satellite imagery analysis, maybe much less than that, because we only see the certain features from the surface of the others. So also, actually, there are certain techniques that even if you have not abundant number of images, but you can still augment it by certain techniques. So yeah.
Thanks. We have Robin and Sarah. Jeffrey Knopf, are you still there? Did we lose Jeffrey? We lost him. Okay. One thing I want to put on the table for, I think we need, the faculty at least need to think about, I mean, is, what we assess to be the implications of this form of AI for our own, instructions. What do we, I mean, we've been, there's so many questions. And Sarah and I have been thinking about this a little bit from a pedagogy standpoint, but we haven't really come to conclusions yet. But I think as we develop our curricula for our students, and as we teach individual classes, I think we have to give much more attention to some of the issues that have been raised here, because it could be transformative in a very positive sense, or it could also be a disaster. And so I was hopeful that Jeff, as our program chair, could give some thought to this. But I think we, as a faculty, we also need to kind of address this issue. But I'll try to raise that subsequently with Jeff and others. Robert, you've been very patient.
Yeah, Yanliang, thank you so much for your talk. And just in full disclosure to the group here, Yanliang also shared with me yesterday some of the searches that he did in the export control realm, and particularly those focused on regulatory interpretation and analysis. And so really what I want to comment on, and I'll try to keep my remarks here brief, is sort of the industry side and industry as a potential user of these types of tools, ChatGPT, to comply with export controls. So I think it may have a larger implication in terms of just general usage of the tool. Is in general, I think, at least right now, I would guess that there's probably going to be some skepticism about the value, but that I don't know how long that skepticism is going to last. And this kind of touches on what you had kind of mentioned earlier, is that some of the information with the searches are not 100% accurate. They're close, but they aren't quite there. And you have a certain number of practitioners in the export control realm in industry that have been pitched for 2 decades now. All of these tools are going to help them, search the commerce control list and determine whether an export license is required or not quickly. I remember attending some of these demos, dating myself, 15, 20 years ago, and they just never really were quite there. And when I saw the examples that you shared, it's getting closer. I was impressed. The example with the mass spectrometer in particular, what it mentioned caution should be taken with regards to China, and that, probably you should assume that an export license is going to be required for China. It's actually not accurate, but it's good advice. And what I would have liked to have seen would have been the next level of nuance, where it would have actually said, although per the country chart, a license is not required for ECCN 38999, you should be aware of the military end use rule with respect to China and the fact that this ECCN is listed, and you should take great care with the entity list and potential military. If it had done that, I would have been like, okay, we're there. We're where we need to be. And I suspect we're very close. There will be some skepticism, I think, in industry, just based on just a year and a half ago, I attended an industry roundtable. And someone, as an export compliance officer with one of the major tech companies, said, I don't know how many times companies have pitched to me these AI-enabled tools and telling me it's going to solve all my problems. I'm just not, I can't even take these sales pitches seriously. So you're going to have that skepticism out there. But, if it's getting close, kind of based on the searches that I saw, I do wonder though, and this is kind of the larger implication, is with hallucinations, if these start to kind of work their way into regulatory interpretation with real legal bearing for a company may just be wary of using these tools. And I kind of wonder if this overall enterprise is still going to end up somewhere in this space like Wikipedia, where like everyone uses it, but everyone is kind of aware that some of the information is it may not be fully accurate or thorough. And I think that's just sort of food for thought for all of us. Is this going to, with hallucinations in particular, is this technology going to drive itself into kind of some limitation of value? And that's just an open question. I don't know, but anyway, those are just some thoughts based on what I saw.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you for that. I actually have a little bit of a comment on the accuracy issue. So I believe that accuracy may not be an issue when there is proper attribution. So, because even in human research, researchers often make mistakes, but what makes their research scientific isn't the fact they're always accurate, but the fact that they're honest about making their mistakes and in attributing their mistakes to sources. Sort of, this is my thought process, where did I go wrong? And that's the peer review process. So even if the app is not 100% accurate, if it gives proper attribution, like if it points you to the ECCN number so you can quickly go and check for yourself, that is better than not having it.
Yeah.
And also with accuracy, one potential application could be sort of flagging transactions that otherwise would not have been reviewed at all. So for example, a lot of transactions I think are now, the volume of transactions is too large for humans to review. So even if it's able to flag 2 or 3 out of 5 problematic transactions that otherwise would have gone unnoticed, that there is added value in that.
Thanks. Sarah?
Just to start, sorry for taking the floor again, but this was so fascinating. I had a similar thought to what Robert had, and then I arrived at a similar conclusion to I think what you have, Yanliang, which is that, if just like using Wikipedia at this phase in my life, I do sometimes have to Wikipedia things, but then I go to the source that it cites, and I go to the source and figure out if what Wikipedia thinks is true is actually true. And I can imagine doing something similar with the results of ChatGPT or GPT-4. And I guess where I'm still weighing the utility for myself as a researcher is like, will I spend more time fact checking because I'm so skeptical about an issue area that I don't know very much about, that it's not worth it? Or is that not the case? And I haven't reconciled that for myself yet. And I think it probably depends on if you're asking it to brainstorm some ideas versus provide accurate information about something that's really critically important that you don't know very much about. Maybe those answers are different. I wanted to switch gears though and talk about something slightly different that we haven't really brought up, although Eduardo's question made me think about bias. There's so much research now in our field and in every field that talks about the importance of diversity to our outcomes. And part of me wonders if in increasingly relying upon AI, do we inadvertently eliminate sources of diversity that are actually very important to our work? And on the one hand, I can imagine if you're feeding a corpus of data and text to a chatbot, then to some extent you can control and ensure that there is, for example, if you wanted to analyze, answer some question and you wanted to make sure that you weren't just citing a bunch of older white men, you could make sure that you had a corpus of text that was more inclusive. But I also think even that is not reflective of sort of the full body of perspectives. And so I could imagine, for example, in some of these negotiation approaches, that you would really miss some potentially very important perspectives that you didn't even know were missing in the first place, and therefore couldn't control for them. And so that's just something that I wanted to kind of put on the table, because if we think of diversity in every sense of the word, like socioeconomic background, where you grew up, just all of these things that make a person a whole person, to what degree are those then lost or downplayed or what have you? And are we really able to replace them or substitute for them, even if we're trying to be very conscious about doing that? So that's just something I wanted to kind of throw out there.
Yeah, thank you. You know what I'm struck by a number of things. One, this has just exploded on the scene here. I mean, we really haven't had discussions, at least at CNS, for more than a couple of months, and already it's moving ahead so rapidly. What I worry about is when I was in New York about a month ago, and I met with a number of diplomats, some fairly senior diplomats. They were totally ignorant. They had never looked at chat GPT at that stage. They had no clue about what was possible. They were kind of intrigued. And I know from my own experience, one of the frustrations in the NPT context, is how difficult it is to get diplomats who are not, for the most part, that familiar with technology, to think about the impact of new technologies on the issues that they've been talking about for decades. And so I suspect that may well be the case with respect to artificial intelligence as well. And there will probably be a resistance based upon kind of ignorance to considerable extent to kind of address these issues. And so I think so that's the downside. The positive side, and we've had some discussions internally, that maybe this issue is ripe for discussions in a multilateral forum, or at least among some parties who find it difficult to talk about anything else, because it doesn't clearly advantage one side or another. I mean, these are issues. I mean, China has it. I mean, this will impact upon China in all different kinds of ways. I don't know. Talk about guardrails. I mean, it may be very difficult with this technology to censor certain kinds of information for many countries to do that. And so I think China, the United States, Russia, much of the developing world, all may have reasons to begin to talk about this. I just don't know how we introduce this into the discussion. I'm just kind of curious. We have with us a visiting diplomat from Peru, based in New York. I mean, is there any conversation at all within the UN system about this issue?
No, to be honest, the first time that I talk about the ChatGPT was with you.
Yeah.
I heard before that for diplomats was more for the idea of, oh, maybe this app can help us to prepare the speeches, but no more. This is the basic thing for us.
So I think, something for us to think about is, how do we get practicing diplomats to begin to explore these issues? Because as I think you've mentioned and others have talked about, we are accustomed to certain weapons of mass destruction. This could prove to be one, or it could have tremendous potential. It will have tremendous potential, but we need to have that kind of conversation.
I have a comment for both you and Sarah. So for those bias, actually, you're very true. It's a very concerning issues, because the machine learning we are relying on these days is more like inductive approach. So it eventually bound by the developer or engineer. If that person has a certain bias, then the data he collect or she collected might also have more inclined for a certain area. So of course, reinforced running some other technique can overcome those things. But anyway, but there's already certain studies about this. So that one, I remember, I forgot the author's name, I can think of it later. Especially put emphasis on the gender issues or gender bias. So those should be resolved from the beginning of the development stage of AI. So I think there's already some studies going on. In my book, your interest.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So for Dr. Porter's comment, so there's no such AI specific or GPT specific discussion at the UN level, but there are definitely certain level of effort at the United Nations or multilateral level. For example, in terms of development stage of AI, there's certain discussion within the NATO. They already adopted certain principle on how to do, so 6 principles for development of AI or something like that. Also, each country has their own announced their national development principle for AI or responsible AI as well. But for the use of AI, there's a group called Global Government Experts at the UN. So that focus on implementation of the certain conventional weapons. So it's basically they are assessing whether the international humanitarian law is applicable to lethal autonomous weapons and so on. So there's a lot of discussion going on there. But in terms of diffusion of AI, there's no any effort at the multinational level. So I think it could be your future effort.
So I think thank you, first of all, Yanliang, that was really, spectacular. I'm going to have to look at your outline and think through some of the points that you made and then experiment, because there was just so much packed, into the 40 minutes or so that you spoke. But I think it's really important for us as a center and as a university to also invest in this. I'm not aware of what other people are doing. I'm sure there are meetings elsewhere on this topic, but since we don't have a corner on the market, but we have probably more people working in non-proliferation than any place else. It's really, I think, imperative for us to think about this, at least as it applies in the non-proliferation space. And I've already mentioned to Allison, I think it would really be fascinating if she would take the lead in looking at the bio area in the same fashion that Yanliang did in his short piece for the website on the nuclear side, because I think we should be part of that conversation. If we can provide some guidance, I think we should try to do that. And this is also an area where it may well be that our graduate students are far more familiar with the subject matter and the tools than those of us who've been around for a very long time. So since we're committed from a diversity standpoint in bringing in more young people to the process, I think we really need to exploit people like yourself to better understand both the potential as well as some of the perils of this fascinating new technology. So please join me in thanking our speaker.